thank you for being here. We're really excited to have Nicholas Erickson here from Reyes Brown Riley talking about the KPIs they're using to drive efficiency. So this is, again, one of our LitiCast sessions, trying to bring more of those conversations you're having at LitiQuest to you throughout the year. And then we also have Art on the call, one of our customer success managers, who's going to help kind of guide the conversation and really dive into how they got to these KPIs and then what they're using them for. So let's get going. As always, you have chat, Q&A, and raise your hand. So use the chat to talk about Florida and Texas drivers if you choose, or add any other commentary. If you have a question that you want Nicholas to answer throughout the presentation or at the end, that's a great spot for that. If for some reason your question is longer or you don't want to type the whole thing out, that's where the raise the hand feature comes in. We can actually pass you the mic and unmute so that you can ask it live. Here's a look at today's agenda. We're going to look at what KPIs matter, reimagining accountability, driving efficiency through KPI accountability, and the end result. And then again, we have Art, one of our enterprise customer success managers. Art, you'll probably recognize him from a couple of LitiQuest sessions last year. Great speaker. So happy to have you and Nicholas presenting today. And then Nicholas is the admin at Reyes Brown Law. I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that or say a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love just to talk about, our presenter, Nick, today. So, what else can I really say about the guy? The guy's a genius. He presented last year at LitiQuest. Very likely he's going to be presenting at this year's LitiQuest as well. This guy's always finding ways to drive efficiency in his firm. That's really all I have to say.
Awesome.
I don't know if I'm a genius. I'd say probably closer to an evil mastermind, but
we'll have a poll at the end of this, and you guys can all decide.
Leave your feedback in the chat.
I already know 2 people that would 100% say no, just because I know who's watching. I have the chat up on my other side too, and I see Josh Kortler messaging too. I love Josh. He's a good guy.
All right. Art, is this where I'm kicking it back to you guys?
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So, some of the stuff that I kind of wanted to start off talking with is, like what KPIs truly actually matter in terms of, how are you really driving performance and efficiencies? And a lot of firms struggle probably trying to figure out, I have low performers, mid performers, and high performers. How do I get them all to be at their top potential, right? And so that was kind of what we started looking into within the last, 6 months or so. I sat down with our COO and our CFO, and we just kind of went over what we really want to structure the firm like and how we want to build Litify for the future rather than, we're building it. We were building things for the present at the beginning of all of this, right? And so, and Art's talked to me about this many times before. He's like, what do you got going on? Like, what do you need help with? And it's, he and I sit down on our calls on Mondays or Wednesdays, and we go over a lot of different things. And I kind of held this off for the time being just to see if it actually would help. But we started doing it for our intake team, and I'll show you guys here shortly what my dashboard actually looks like live and in real time. And Art and I took a look at stuff yesterday, and Art was pretty excited about it. So I like to think that means good things for me. But the true thing that we really talked about is, pairing negative data with positive data. And something that I see a lot of firms doing, especially when I watch like previous LitiCasts and stuff like that, or I sit down at a LitiQuest conference and they're talking about building their reports and dashboards. They're trying to build things around, data that makes people happy and makes people excited. And that's good. You want to have that data, but at the same time, you still need to have some accountability. And, I threw a quote in here. I think it was Thomas Jefferson that said this, but if you want something you've never had, you must be willing to do something you've never done. And, beforehand, we were looking at, the pretty metrics. And, I finally decided I don't like the pretty metrics as much because I'm not getting the overall value of it in the end. that I know I can be. And so we started developing some real accountability with negative data paired with our positive data. So we still have those, you're doing great at this aspect, but there's this other aspect that you could probably be doing better. And then pairing that tandem with a hierarchy level of KPIs. So, the biggest thing that I always talk about is you should have ground level KPIs that stem to your mid-level management KPIs, and they help drive that mid-level. And then all of the mid-level ones should drive the highest level, the 40,000 foot view dashboards that people want to look at, right? The ones that the partners are looking at, the C-suite members, the people that really want to see, how is our firm truly performing? What is the health of our firm right now? And that's the beauty of Salesforce, is you can do that stuff in real time. You just need to find a way to actually build it out that way. And that was kind of the direction that we veered off towards and went towards. And then talking about those key percentages of high, medium, and low performers that I was mentioning earlier. How do you really get the most out of each bucket column from them? Through what I call selective data transparency. Realistically, a better word for it is focus. How do you focus your people, right? And it's a hard thing that we sometimes fall into the trap where our top performers are like, okay, cool, I'm at the top. I'm going to coast for a little bit, take a day and then kick it back in gear if anybody, gets close to me. They're not reaching their full potential. Whereas the mid-level performers are like, okay, well, I'm okay right now. I'm not really too worried about things. I'm hitting my minimums. I'm taking care of business in the way that I want to. I don't need to really strain myself, but realistically, I'm not a low performer is the optimistic way that people look at things sometimes, where, a lot of people are guilty at justifying their own means. That's okay. There are definitely optimistic things to look at when you are a mid-level performer, but we all still want to bring people here. And my biggest thing as a manager and as a CMO, anytime that I'm working with somebody, my whole goal is to see what I can do to mentor them and to get them to be their very best, right? So if I can get them to be their very best, and they're going to succeed from the time that they start to 6 months down the line, how much better have you gotten now versus 6 months ago? How much better have you gotten in the last year? We want to see those things, right? And that's kind of one of our biggest focuses, is trying to really give people that data to really understand where they sit. But also making sure that they're only focusing on their own efforts. And this is something that I talked to Art about yesterday, is there's really only 3 things that you can actually control, right? Or there's 3 things that you can't control. It's, the environment. So the weather or anything like that, you can't control that. So if you have rainy days, like we were just talking about, that's more car accidents, but at the same time, that sometimes can be written off by insurance companies, and we all know how that goes, especially here in Texas, where they want to say it's an act of God. But the weather you can't control. The territory that you're given, we are in Texas. That's our only thing. We're not going to control that and change it or anything by any means. My intake agents aren't going to go rogue and start somehow finding cases out in Pennsylvania or anything. That's not how it works. And then the third thing is other people. Right. So I can't control other people, but I can give them information and see how they react to it. Right. So what we want to do is we want to give people true transparency on themselves and see how they react to those things, because that'll tell you one of 2 things. It'll tell you that they're either in the fight and they want to continue working with us, or they're not really ready to step up to the challenge of working with us. And that's okay. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater by any means. As one of Angel, our CEO, he's famous for saying, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We always want to make sure that we want to give everything a fair shake, is kind of the idea. So, but again, doing everything from the top down in terms of driving your KPIs. What do you want? What are the main things that you want to focus on, and how are you going to get there? And the how are you going to get there is through the people that are actually doing the work. And you have to put them at the forefront of those things, right? So for example, one of our big KPIs, and you can actually skip to the next the next screen, Shaylee, real quick here. So for example, these are just our KPIs in the accountability list that I have. So we have the executive level, which is cost per acquisition or cost per signed case, sometimes people say. We also have total signed cases, total settlements, and average fees, right? So to drive those 4 numbers, we need overall team close rate. We need missed call rate to be as low as possible. We need to make sure that our drop rate is very low, and we need to make sure that our total signed intakes is very high. And then if we take a look at the ground level, so my agents that are actually answering phone calls, they need to look at their signed cases. They want to look at their close rate. They want to look at their kinetic contact meter. And I'll explain what that is here in a little bit when I show my dashboard. And then we also look at their missed opportunities and their drop rate. And drop rate, for anybody that wants to know, that is cases that we've signed and we pushed into our pre-litigation team. And for whatever reason, they determined that it wasn't a valid case or the client dropped us, right? So usually, for the most part, we don't have clients dropping us. We have instances where our attorneys take a look. We find some pretty darn difficult facts to get around. The client ends up being actually placed at fault on the police report. There's no way to amend it, or there's just no insurance on the third party, and our first party insurance was only liability. So it's those metrics that all build things up to the top level, right? And so if I have a team of intake agents that are doing all of those 5 things really well, my mid-level and my executive level management KPIs are going to look extremely well, like extremely good, so but yeah, Art, did you have any questions? I feel like I've been talking everybody's ear off, and I hate the sound of it.
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job at answering some of the ones that came up as you were going through this. Like, what is drop rate, right? How do you define, like, what is considered a missed opportunity, right? Is it simply that you didn't call the client back or something like that, or they signed up with another firm? And then last but not least, what is kinetic contact meter? But I think you're probably going to go over those, right? When you actually open up the dashboards.
Can I share screen real quick here? Cool. Give me a sec. All right. So this is my actual intake agent dashboard. It's a dynamic dashboard, and I'll get into what these KPIs actually truly mean. So for example, our missed opportunities, we have a status feature inside of our path on our intakes that says closed unsigned, which means that if we've sent a retainer and we never signed it, that means that we screwed up. And that's the biggest component for missed opportunities. That, as well as if we move it to turn down and we state that the reason was that they decided to use another firm, or they decided to not pursue the case, right? So those are 3 specific instances where we struggled to close or do our job right. Okay. So that's what missed opportunities means. As you guys can see, you guys are seeing my dashboard, right?
Yeah. Can everybody see? And then are they able to see it clearly as well?
Yes, you guys are good.
I know that I
Awesome.
sometimes have like a super micro small screen. I know Walt Bauer's watching, and I know Josh Kortler's watching, and they tease me.
Josh
if
did
you
just
really
say
want Josh, I
small.
will. Yeah, he's poking at me. Okay, I'll make it bigger for you. So, alrighty. So here's the dashboard, and I'll break down why the components are here. Each individual component is here for a reason. I'm a very, very big advocate for not sticking components on there that don't need to be on there. Items that distract people from their true overall goal, let's not put that in front of them, right? So we used to have it where we gave everybody the ability to see everybody's signed cases or their close rates or everything like that. We actually don't do that anymore, solely because that's where you get the people that fall into what I call the nesting category, where they get comfortable. And we don't want people to necessarily get overly comfortable. We still want them to try and push forward in terms of, reaching what their potential is. And if you're allowing them to see exactly where they sit amongst everybody, you start running into a problem where if they're in the top half, they think, oh, I'm safe, But realistically, it's not about being safe. It's about seeing what you can do to drive your overall performance. What can you do to make yourself the best you that you can be, right? And so everybody enjoys, working hard and, seeing the results from those. And that's what I firmly believe anyways. That's why I do what I do. I like being the best at something. And although I will not say that I'm anywhere near the best at what I do, and there's always so many things for me to learn, I still want to figure out what I can do to be better, right? And so if we have the right individuals that are really focusing on doing that, they'll respond appropriately, right? So, but yeah, let's go into the dashboard component. So right here, I'm seeing my signed cases. So I'm looking at one of my intake managers. Her name is Bianca Palacios. She's very good at what she does. She's been with us for a little over 3 years now. What was that, Art?
Is this what you would consider to be the view of an intake agent? Like, this is like a top performer, then is that what we're looking at?
So she's one of the top performers, but she's not at the top right now. And that's okay. She's in the top 5%. We'll put it that way. So, but I'm able to see how many signed cases that she has total this month. And this is as up to date as it can get. I mean, I'll hit refresh right here so everybody can see. I'm not a big, a big pro screenshot kind of guy. I'd rather show people in real time what we're doing. It's a little bit more fun, a little bit more interactive. So, but I can see her signed cases. I can see what her close rate is. I can see what her drop rate is, and I can see what her missed opportunities are. And that's what she sees, right? So if I go into this and I log in as somebody else and I look at this dashboard, I'll see it as somebody else. Right now I have it edited, so I'm just seeing hers, which I'm sure I probably have about 2 or 3 emails of my intake agents being like, why am I only seeing Bianca's metrics? But yeah, we'll open it back up to them. They can see the team metrics here, these 3 main key components that the managers realistically want to look at for their KPIs. What our missed call rate is, what our team's close rate is, and what our overall signed cases is. So like we have 466 signed cases right now, all motor vehicle and truck accident cases. We have 20% missed call rate, which means that one out of 5 calls that comes in ends up not being answered, which is a big problem. So we are currently working on trying to find better ways to get that down. And that's rather high right now. We can usually get that down around 12, 13%. So we just have a lot of phone calls coming in. But team's close rate, we're sitting at 42%. And one thing that, I figured I'd probably pause and talk about in terms of what our close rate means, because I know that there's a lot of other firms that only focus on their close rate for qualified cases. Our data that we've had for decades goes back and tells us what our overall close rate is in terms of overall signed cases divided by total intakes. And the reason why I do that is not necessarily to make it harder on my people to get to 100%. It's more so along the lines of we realistically just want to make sure that intake and marketing are kind of joined together. That's kind of my attitude about it, is if that close rate goes down, then maybe myself as the person that manages our PPC and stuff, we want to maybe look at some of the campaigns that we're driving leads from, and maybe they're not driving quality leads. And we'll look and see what we can do about that. But realistically, we know based off of decades of data what it should be for if somebody's really optimizing what they're capable of, right? So like Bianca's right here at 51.9%. Our overall goal, like our bare minimum that we want, is 50%. So typically 1 out of 2 leads that come in are getting signed up. And that's usually meaning 1 out of every 2 leads that we bring in are qualified signed cases that we can sign, is our attitude about it. So if we're really clipping at the right level, we should see people signing 50% and above. We have very hyper targeted campaigns. We make sure that we're trying to weed out all of the bogus case types, stuff like that. But we still get them, that's a component of what happens sometimes, right? So, but an overall team close rate of 50% is kind of where we want to sit. Some people will be higher, some people will be lower. It all balances out. That average just makes a lot more sense if you join those 2 departments together. So the next thing that I was going to talk about, and this is Art's favorite thing, Art was really excited about this yesterday. So we have a kinetic contact meter. So this is what tells us if our current open intakes that have not signed, so meaning we haven't turned them down, or we haven't referred them out, or we haven't signed them. This is what tells us what the percentage of those cases or those intakes are being contacted appropriately. And our appropriate time frame that we talk about is 2.5 hours. They need to be either texted or have a definitive 2 two-way outbound phone call that we have measured from RingCentral. So if somebody calls and makes an outbound phone call and they log the outbound phone call, it marks it as a two-way phone call if it notices that the other person answered. And then that way we have that ability to realistically see, hey, like this person is following up on their leads. And that's a really important thing for us. And then also the intakes I own. The intakes I own is the, that's their total intakes that they've taken for the month. So Bianca's taken over 100 intakes this month so far and signed 55. And then on top of that, her current kinetic intakes, which this is her total level of open intakes, is about 5. We don't ever want somebody going over 10 because they're not going to follow up on them appropriately. So
that's like kind of how you manage then, like making sure that your intake agents aren't being overloaded with stuff then.
Exactly.
Is making sure that they only have like 5 or 6 kinetic intakes that they should be contacting. For the kinetic contact meter though itself, I mean, what is your guys' baseline for
we
contact?
typically say about 80% is where our sweet spot is. So we allow for 80% at the bare minimum, but we'd like it to be at 100% if possible, especially throughout the day. We have designated intake pods. So like how a lot of teams or a lot of firms have like matter pods, the matter teams or whatever. We do the same thing, but with intake, where we have a manager, we have a lead, and then we have, everybody else that's on that team is on different schedules. So they can help everybody else follow up on their intakes appropriately and making those contacts. It's better to try and contact that person instead of just neglecting it and saying, well, I'll get to it tomorrow when I log back in. We're like, well, if they're able to sign up at 6:30 and you're off at 5, let's pass it over to one of your teammates and they can help you get it signed. That's kind of one of our big components of like, hey, let's work together, And I always talk about the balance, the yin and the yang of how things realistically need to function inside of a sales department. Sales or intake, realistically, they're kind of the same thing if you treat them in terms of how a business runs. But, our intake team has to have a balance. You can't have too many open intakes. You can't be the only person signing cases. You can't be the only person taking intakes, There's got to be a balance, and everybody has a different balance, right? So our new people aren't going to be able to take 106 intakes because they're not going to know what to do with all 106. Whereas Bianca's been doing this for 3 years. She knows what to do with 100 plus intakes a month. She's going to sign 51.9% of them. She's kind of the measuring stick in that regard. So she's hovering right where our typical average is, but that's because overall with our data, we've noticed that that's typically what the market entails, and what it brings us is 50% of a close rate. And, focusing in on that KPI kind of helps them really see their health of how they're operating. So if they have too many open intakes and their close rate dips, it's because they have too many open intakes. They're not following up on them appropriately, right? If they have too many signed cases, but their drop rate is too high, that means that they're signing things up without actually qualifying the lead. Right. So everything has a balance KPI to it. Everything has a purpose. So the kinetic contact meter, if that goes way down, it means that they're taking way too many intakes. So for example, Bianca has 5 right now and she's at 100%. Bianca could probably take closer to 10, right? But that's because it's who she is. That's how she operates. She's very efficient in what she does. She's type A, whereas I have some new people. If we were to flip over to them, they'd probably be at a lot of intakes, and their kinetic contact meter would be fairly low. But that's all part of learning. That's where we can help our new people in seeing where they struggle. If they're just taking way too many intakes, like hungry hippos, they're not going to have a high close rate. And if they're not going to have a high close rate, that's going to hurt us in the long run. It's better for them to find where their balance is of total open intakes and cases that they can sign in a month to start, and then inch towards, the top of the leaderboard, because they get more efficient in how they do things, and they're able to realistically scale themselves up into being a top performer or a mid-level performer. If they just started and they're a low performer, there's the ability to kind of, it has ebbs and flows, where some of our top performers might become mid-level performers the next month. Maybe it's because they just weren't, maybe they had vacation, they missed a month, and that's okay. But at the same time, we need to see an overall, and we can switch this out to like a per year basis. So one thing that I like to focus on a lot is our, I don't have this for a year, but I mean, I can do this for, let's just say, let's look at Bianca's last quarter. So I can see who the total signed case leader is here, and I can see who the close rate leaders are as well. So that was another thing that I was going to talk about. So Bianca signed 110 cases in the last quarter. She was 70 some cases behind. So let me go back here. Oop, there we go. Wrong one. There we go. So 21.9% missed call rate last quarter. So we're trying to get that down. So 20% is a little bit better. Our close rate is up this month compared to the last quarter. Last quarter was 39.3%. And we've kind of worked on a few other things. I see Josh has a question. How do you keep following up? So Josh asked, how do people, or how do you keep following up on intakes that are assigned to a specific user if they go on vacation or are sick for a number of days? So I have a list view where they can see their team's intakes rather than just their own intakes. And so they have the ability to kind of see that contact meter, and they can go ahead and they can follow up on those individuals, because the contact meter is literally like a little checkbox where if it's been contacted, it turns green. If it hasn't been contacted, it turns red. So they then utilize that to determine, okay, these people need to realistically kind of follow up on those. And little by little, their team will help them clean out or clean up their open intakes, because you'll start seeing that they have, some, who gets credit? So we have a dual credit system. So we have a secondary field that populates the user. Yeah. Yeah. So we use something called saved by, which is what we kind of use to give dual credit to each individual. So that goes towards like our quarterly incentives if they're able to sign certain amount of cases with their drop rate being low. It factors a lot of those other things in terms of actually incentivizing people to move forward with, trying to be better. That's kind of the whole goal, right? So, but I'll go back to this month. So
Nicholas, we have one other question about the drop rate. Is that a percentage of cases dropped or how quickly you drop?
That is a percentage of what cases drop, not how quickly they drop. So we can look at, and that will, again, you'll see that grow over time. So we allow for typically 17%. One of our biggest rules is, when in doubt, sign it up. Because we'd rather err on the side of caution and get a client signed, and then say if later down the line an attorney says we can't do anything to help this individual, we'll drop that and then we'll move forward. But at least we still took a stab at it. It's our way of preventing ourselves from missing out on more opportunities that were actual qualified signed cases, because we'd rather err on the side of caution if we don't know what the insurance is. We're not going to force our agents to go down a whole path of investigation. We're just going to say, okay, do you think that they have insurance? What kind of car were they driving? If it was a higher end vehicle, then yeah, they're likely probably going to have insurance here in Texas. On top of that, even asking them, do you have first party coverage? Yes, we do, and then we'll go and sign that up. But, we have 3 pillars. It's fault, injuries, and coverage. They need to have injuries. Obviously, you have to have those damages in any state in a car accident case. You need to make sure that you're not at fault or you're above 51% at fault in Texas. And then you need to have coverage. So you need to have the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So, and that's kind of what I keep telling our intake agents is like, look, if you have 2 out of the 3, sign it up. We'll find out. If you're uncertain on the third, but if you know for a fact that they don't have coverage themselves for UM or UIM, and the third party for sure didn't have coverage on the police report, and we'll say, you know what, it's probably not going to be a case that we can pursue, unfortunately. But yeah, that was a good question. So
earlier, I did have a question for you too as well,
yeah.
Nick. So earlier, like when we started this presentation, you were talking about using positive metrics, and then of course using negative metrics. What would you consider to be like your negative metrics?
So negative metrics can be considered drop rate. So like drop rate's not a good thing. Missed call rate is not a good thing. You don't want to have a high drop rate. Your close rate, if it's not pretty, Bianca is just a really good example. But in terms of like actually making sure that you have those numbers, you want to realistically see, because like, for example, like my team's missed call rate, 20% is too high. That's why it turns red, right? My missed opportunities, times that we messed up, point them in the direction of their mistakes and let's have them learn from them, right? It's not necessarily like we're trying to like train a dog where we stick their nose and, in an accident that they had on the carpet, but the idea is to try and help them learn and overcome, or maybe even recognize those patterns. So say, for example, if we have an individual that's missing out on a lot of opportunities because they're deciding to use another firm, then that means that they're not creating enough value for what we do and how we operate and what our brand actually contains. We have a ton of reviews. We should utilize that as much as possible. And if somebody's not doing that, they'll see more missed opportunities. Right. And so that's just kind of the way that we function in terms of that. So, but yeah, so this is the intake agent dashboard itself. And we also have another dashboard on top of that, which is our management dashboard. So this is the one that I think Art liked the most yesterday when we went over this.
Oh yeah. This is the nitty gritty. Like this is what it all kind of leads up to.
Yeah.
This.
And so like the biggest thing that we talk about is focusing people, right? So if I'm trying to get my people to focus on 5 metrics, I'm going to get them to focus on those 5 metrics, and that's it for themselves. Our managers are going to focus on other things because then they need to see who to coach and who to focus on, right? So some people may have extremely high close rates, whereas some people might have extremely low close rates. And some people may have extremely low close rates with a ton of intakes that have been taken. And that's the individual that we probably want to talk to first and foremost, because that's going to boost our overall team's close rate altogether. So, and as you guys can see, we've signed I think we've signed a case or 2 since we've been on this. So, but our team's close rate overall has gone up from like 41% is what I think it was at the beginning, but now it's 42. So these are our typical team KPIs, our overall team health. Right. So if we're seeing red here, that means that we haven't hit our goals yet. Our goal this quarter is 500 signed cases. We're, what is it, the 25th today? Yeah, we're 25 days in, we're at 466 signed cases. I like to think that we'll probably hit 500 by the end of this week. So that's kind of the idea. And then we've got a couple more days next week to sign some more cases. So but I can sit here and I can see our top performers, and I can see our mid-level performers, and I can see our low-level performers. So one thing too that I like to talk about, that we made a decision once we got to a higher scale in order to realistically make some impactful moves that made small percentages, big percentages at the top, was to make sure that our top performers are focused on what they're doing, right? So we have some individuals here that have, signed cases that are like pretty abysmal, like Gustavo, for example. He's our overnight guy. He's not going to sign a whole ton of cases, but that's why his close rate is 3%. I typically like to see him around 20% for a close rate, because usually when we have some cases come in overnight, we can still sign some of them. There's actually a funny story. We have a guy by the name of Martin. He went out and hung out with his friends one night, and he came home and he just happened to be looking at his emails on his phone, and a phone call came in, and Martin answered the phone, and he ended up signing him at like 1 a.m. And Gustavo was upset because that was one of the signed cases that he could have had. He doesn't get very many. So, but yeah, Gustavo emailed him right away, and he goes, "You are not supposed to be on. That was supposed to be my signed case." And he wasn't like too angry at Martin, because Martin's a pretty lovable guy. So nobody can really get mad or get angry at him in terms of, trying to help out. So, but I can see like some of our individuals, what I was really kind of alluding to is, we have some people that don't sign cases. They just focus on converting, but they still are incentivized to sign some cases. So, we have individuals that just go through the process of migrating the case from intake to matter. And I just saw Josh's message saying brag, humble brag, I hope. But, I'll go back to what I was kind of saying. We utilize the converters essentially to take off some of the tedious work processes of converting an intake to a matter. Like, we have all of our fields that populate over, but we want to make sure that all of our tabs are up to date. We also have them do, a diagram of how the accident actually happened. So then that way the attorneys can take a look at it and have a really good idea as to how the whole incident occurred. They also handle a few other things as well to make sure that the overall matter, when it's being packaged up, is nice and tied in a tight little bow and put on our pre-lit team's desk. So that's kind of what those people do, what those team members do, and they're very good at what they do. And they take a lot of the time off of my top performers, who then can go and take as many phone calls as they can, which helps our close rate increase, right? So, not every salesperson is detail oriented and good at sales, and not every salesperson is really good at sales or detail oriented, right? So we take more of our detail oriented people that may not be the best at the sales aspect of things and getting people to sign on the dotted line. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we give them every opportunity to do that sales tactic, but still helping them in terms of like giving them something to do and something to take ownership of. And that's their conversion quality. So, but yeah, so this dashboard realistically just shows where my performers are in signed cases and then where their close rate is amongst everybody else. So we can see those double metrics. So like, for example, a 64% close rate looks incredibly good, but a 64% close rate at 7 signed cases is, they haven't taken very many intakes, and it kind of makes us want to have them take more cases or more intakes. So, but if we have somebody that's signed 41 cases and they're closing at 32%, we might want to take a look into why that individual is struggling in terms of, not signing at 50%, because they've probably taken enough intakes, to start fitting that line of 50%, right? So if we take a look at our top 4 people, they're closing above 50% and they're above their fair share of workload in terms of signed cases, right? And then we also have some other individuals that are closing at 47% with 36. So this is where I'd probably consider the mid-level right about here. So our top performers are our first 4, and then our mid-level is probably going to go down here to 18, where Manny is actually a converter, and he's good at signing cases. So he's got 60% at 18 cases, and he's helping convert cases, which is pretty impressive for him. So especially because he is fairly new still, so he's getting the hang of stuff. So I can see our overall team's kinetic contact meter. My team doesn't like this dashboard because as soon as I start seeing that stuff's in the red, I go over there and I start telling them that they need to make outbound phone calls, because this is pretty ugly right now. I'm not going to lie. So not the best, but teams drop rate, I can see what our overall team drop rate is. And then down here, I can see kinetic intakes by intake owner against kinetic contact meter. So for example, Sal has 1 open intake and he's followed up on that 1. So he could definitely take more intakes. My top performers right now in terms of who has the most intakes are 2 of our newer people, and they're at an off shift. So I need to talk to their team members in order to help them follow up on their intakes, right? So this is kind of what we use this in terms of being able to navigate things on a real time basis. And letting people know, hey, you need to focus on this KPI, right? So we then can see our missed opportunities by intake owner. Unfortunately, Bianca's at the highest right now, but at the same time, Bianca tends to be the individual that takes ownership of the harder to close people, where they may or may not have had problems with the original person that talked to them. And we kind of try to see if she can save them. Sometimes she can't. So it is what it is. So drop rate by intake owner, this is where we can see who's signing cases and then who's signing cases that aren't actually cases, right? So 22% drop rate at the very beginning of the month or throughout the initial first month is fairly high. That's not the most ideal situation. So, and then, Lorelai's here with 16.7%. But if we go ahead and we take a look over here, how many cases has Lorelai signed? She signed 6 and one of them dropped. That's not terrible. But at the same time, I don't expect that to stay that high. If she signs more cases, that'll continue to go down as she signs more. So getting into Art's favorite thing is the signed case forecasting. So we can realistically take a look into what the trends have been for this month, and we can create some forecasting metrics saying where we likely think that we're about to land. I'd like this to be closer to 600, but that's just because I'm a little greedy of a marketer. So I like seeing as many signed cases as we can possibly sign. I don't like not hitting goals. So yeah, we're on pace for a decent amount anyways. Missed call rate overall, I can see that we're at 20%. Again, that's in the red. It's not good. Teams drop rate over here, as well as teams close rate. So I can also do forecasting by agent. So I can see that Daniela is forecasting currently for 97 intakes signed. Bianca's forecasting for 68, and I can see where everybody's kind of falling into line. So another big component. I see you, Art. So the forecasting metric, realistically, it takes into consideration the amount of days that we've already had and the amount of days that we have left. And then it takes that into consideration, breaks it down with our average signed case by day. And then it'll plug that in and tell us, hey, let's see if you can exceed this level. So like, for example, it gets more accurate as the month goes on. So it kind of takes the total intakes that have signed so far, takes the average on a per day basis, and then multiplies that out based off of how many days are in the month and how many days are left in the month. So that's how we focus on that forecasting metric. So, and then here's another one of Art's favorite components. My biggest, the one that I look at on a constant basis, right? So as a marketer, you always kind of want to know, how often are we signing cases at certain times of day? What is the best day to sign cases? What is the best day to make sure that we have phone calls coming in, or even making sure that we have the coverage? And the coverage is the biggest reason why we're looking at this. So we actually have an intake director, and this is one of the biggest things that he looks at. So he's taking a look at these in terms of making sure that we're actually staffing people at the appropriate times, in terms of making sure that we have people at the high volume hours of phone calls coming in. So I can see on this top one here, call volume measured against missed call percentage by hour of day. So midnight to 11 p.m., I can see that 11 a.m. is where our total overall call volume is the highest. And we've, missed 16% of those calls. So the biggest thing is that we're seeing that the lower, we're missing less calls here on this hour that has a higher number of inbound phone calls compared to the next hour. Whereas we have, and this is one thing that I was talking to Art about, is before we were seeing that we were really struggling at 11 a.m., but that's when the majority of our phone calls realistically come in, is 11 a.m. So we decided that we needed to maybe take a look at our lunch schedules for everybody, and making sure that we had enough adequate, staffing at that 11 a.m. hour. And so realistically, what we ended up doing is we ended up pushing off the missed call rate onto noon, but 20% of 203 is significantly less than 20% of 268. Whereas, we miss 4% less calls by moving that hour to lunch, which helps us close more cases, which then helps us sign more, which then helps our close rate go up, as well as our overall cost per acquisition at the executive level go down, right? So, and we can see that we're really struggling to answer phone calls here at the 10 o'clock hour. So, next thing that we kind of take a look at to make sure that we actually are truly seeing an accurate result up here is our call volume measured against signed cases by hour of day. So if I'm seeing that we have a high call volume, but the signed cases isn't flowing with it. So like, for example, I'm seeing that my highest call volume is signing 32 cases, whereas the hour before that, I have a call volume of, quite a significant amount less that's signing more cases. So realistically, we may want to look at, okay, why are we having that trouble between the 10 a.m. and 11 a.m.? So this should, in theory, be higher. So same thing in terms of, our closed here at noon. We have less phone calls coming in, but we obviously have less signed cases. And then, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock are looking really good for signing cases at a lower call volume. So that means that we're getting really good focus on individuals at those mid-afternoon or early afternoon hours. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we like to look at in terms of, seeing how our staffing goes for scheduling. So, and then the last one is just intake signed by hour of open date against sum of missed opportunities. So where are we missing out on our overall open intakes at those hours of days? And where are we seeing the missed opportunities come into play, right? So are we missing more opportunities here at 6 o'clock at night, meaning we may not have answered them appropriately, but we ended up losing those intakes that should have signed, but that gives us real actionable data to determine, okay, where are we struggling to sign cases at what time of day, right? So that's the biggest one. And then the last one, I've talked about this at LitiQuest before, but we have our Google reviews piped into Litify. So I can see our 5-star client Google reviews by our owners. So I can see who's actually making the efforts to talk to their clients and get them, the individuals that sign up or, that call in that want to give us a Google review. They tend to mention our intake staff because they're pretty good at what they do. I'm very, very proud of all of them. So, but Daniel, Bianca, Miguel, they're very consistent at being able to be helpful. So we have that helpful aspect of, making sure that, our people are doing what they're supposed to be doing on the phone and they're getting good client reviews. So, but that's all I've got in terms of sharing my screen on my dashboards, other than, we have the executive level dashboard, but I'm going to keep that one a little closer to my chest. And I know Josh Kortler is going to yell at me about that later, but I think he already knows what the KPIs look like anyways. So, but it's essentially just cost per acquisition and total signed cases is like the main focus that we have. So, so we end up really kind of focusing on how all of those KPIs kind of work together. So our close rate, if that goes down, we should see our cost per signed case go up. If our cost per signed case is going down, but our close rate isn't, or if our cost per signed case is going up and our close rate is going up, that tells me that we're actually not entering intakes. So it actually helps me be able to determine if somebody's trying to game the system as well. It's kind of nice to have all of those KPIs kind of meshed together and they're all intertwined, because realistically it helps you find the signal through all of the noise, especially when you're getting to a higher level. When I started out, managing our PPC and managing our sales team at the beginning of, about midway point of 2021, we were signing 88 cases a month. And, we could get away with, having a decent cost per signed case with, a fairly low close rate, but still hit our goals. But as you continue to scale up and get bigger, those micro percentages that you work on are going to make all the difference later down the line. So, but that's all I really got. If we have any other questions or anything like that.
We have one other question in the chat. You mentioned you use Ring Central. Do you use the Ring Central Contact Center or just the MVP?
We just use the MVP. So we developed and built out our own flows that operate within it. So for example, like whenever, and I didn't really like the original way. Oh my gosh, Josh Kortler, he knows. So Josh, I got to poke fun at him real quick because he keeps messaging in the chat, but Josh was the reason why I moved to Ring Central for a little bit after 8x8, because we have a mutual distaste. I wouldn't say distaste, actually. A mutual, we are rather indifferent about it. We just don't like the technical support that we were receiving. So I'll let Josh speak for himself on that. But so he was on Ring Central when I first met him, and he had gone from Ring Central to Vonage and then back from Vonage to Ring Central. And so I was like, well, if Josh is on Ring Central, I'll go to Ring Central. So we moved over to that. And then now he's on Dialpad, and we're kind of looking at maybe seeing about, looking down the line as if that's something that we could do. But the RC phone app here, we have it integrated into our system, where if a phone call comes in and there's no number to be recognized anywhere, what it ends up doing is, it ends up taking that, it takes that phone number and says, I didn't find anything, and it creates a flow to give them their initial intake questionnaire, which gives them their scripting and gives them their ability to go through the flow of how everything should go and fill out their initial information. And like one of the things that I talk with my intake individuals all the time is, hey, like, if you're going through things the way that they're built, you should be able to sign a retainer within 10 minutes because you're able to go through the questionnaire very briefly. as soon as you complete the questionnaire, you have all the information that you need in order to send a retainer and get it signed. So I have a big thing about, keep it simple, and just kind of use the technology for what it's for. So, but yeah, I think Christy was asking if that she can get a copy of these. I think this is recorded, no?
Yes, this is recorded, and we'll
Cool.
share it in the Litify community once the recording's all processed and all that jazz, so people can revisit what was chatted about.
So,
Yeah.
do you guys have any other questions, Art?
I do.
Again, I told Art before all of this, I want to clarify. I told him that I wanted this to be more of a discussion between him and I and Bailey, and it ended up just being a preach session where I just talked at everybody. So, but
Yeah.
I hope I wasn't too boring and people weren't falling asleep.
So my question that I had for you was, so as we know, like all users, whenever you develop something like this, right, like a new process, they have to look at this dashboard, they should know their metrics, blah, blah, blah. How difficult was it to actually get your users to adopt using these dashboards? And how did you get them to start doing it?
Yeah. I kind of act in a dictator in a way where I just yank away their capabilities to look at their old dashboards. So they have no choice. If they want information, they have to look at what I've given them. I'm a very big pro, individual to voice what I'm working on. And I tell them, hey, look, you guys, like, I'm trying to help you guys get to a different level. And what's going to essentially get you to a different level is going to reward you in the end. It's buying in, it's trusting that process. It's as much as I keep talking about Philly people, Joel Embiid talks about, trust the process, but just like I'm sure Josh Kortler has a process that he gets his people trusting in. So, but anyway, so we go through and we talk a lot about, if we're able to hit these key metrics, we always want to focus them around where they struggle and where they succeed. Because if they're able to take what they're doing well and, try and focus on the areas that they're not doing so well, it'll help them do better in the areas that they are already doing well, right? So if I have an individual that's signing 41 cases at 32%, imagine if we talk to him about closing more people that he's talking to. If he closes at 50%, he's in that top 4. He's just outside of the top 4. But the whole idea about, focusing people's mindsets around things is just getting them to buy into the process, because this has been a 2-year deviation. And one thing, I watched Emily Merriman's, I watched her Liticast yesterday. Just because I was curious. I was like, how does the format go and everything? And she talked about how dashboards are fluid. And so, for the most part, these dashboards will likely change. Like, if anybody that ever actually watched my Litiquest presentation, we used a completely different dashboard. And that was only in October or September?
September.
And now we're in June and we've completely changed how all of our dashboards work. But, we've moved down the line of saying, hey, like, here are the things we want our ground level people that are doing all of the work focusing on. And then the next level is, okay, how do we help them and coach them to be better at the areas that they're struggling with? And then at the very top, we can see the health of everything. So if our cost per signed case goes too high, we then need to talk to the manager saying, hey, what's going on? Why is this happening? And they need to be able to tell us, oh, our close rate is low. Oh, we haven't signed very many cases, or it's an issue with, our follow-ups, things like that. They have that actionable data and they know about it,
Mm-hmm.
And just giving people the information that they realistically need. But, it's a process, and just getting people to buy into it can sometimes be really difficult. But like I said, I'm a little bit of a dictator in that way, where I just say, hey, this is how we're going to do it.
You have to do it this way.
Yeah. So,
I think that's
yeah,
good.
like, I still have access to their old dashboard,
Mhm.
but I use it for proponents of like looking at, what it was before and what it is now, and seeing what we can do to maybe, I always like to try and be proactive and give them things that I know that they're going to be asking for. Like, I know for a fact my converters are probably wondering, how many conversions have I had this month and how fast am I doing it?
Yeah.
So that'll be added to the dashboard later. But, we've recently built these out, and my main focus was to see how fast we could realistically get our salespeople up to speed on it. And they've adopted it pretty well. So
nice. I love that comparison too between this session you did today and what Emily said last time about your dashboards are fluid. You have to revisit them. I think new admins don't realize that. They kind of, feel like their dashboard is their dashboard. And then as we kind of like share the experiences of some more seasoned admins like yourself, I think this is like a big piece to the admin role of like recognizing that you're going to have to make these changes. Your business is growing and adapting all the time, and you're going to have to keep making these changes too. So that's also why it's so helpful to have you on and to see your dashboards and let everybody get new ideas. So thank you so much. I know we're just about out of time.
I think we have one question and answer left. It's did you find it better to have individual dashboards or dynamic ones that multiple people are using? So the one that I'm using is where it is actually based off of the user that's viewing it, right? So if I go ahead and I set it back to, give me 1 second, I might be able to share my screen if I can find the actual, I have 4 monitors, don't judge me. I'm trying to see if I can actually share, but I know where it is. There it is. Sweet. So I'll share this real quick. So for example, I just swapped this back over. So like if I hit edit here, you can actually change the setting here. And you can change it to where you want to view it as other people. So like I moved it back to the dashboard viewer. So like that's what I use is the dynamic dashboard. So like if we look at my stuff, I'm garbage at sales, right? But because I don't have intakes. So that's just what it is. But definitely use dynamic dashboards if you're doing your lower level components, so you're not creating too many individual dashboards, because that turns into a clutter and you end up having to do more maintenance on it anytime that you have new individuals come in. And if you're assigning it to them viewing it and saying it's Bianca's dashboard, it's Daniela's dashboard, it's Nick's dashboard, no, don't do that. Just have it build out to the dynamic feature where it'll tell them they're looking at their own stuff. So
awesome. All right. We are at time now, but thank you so much, Nicholas. It was great to have you and dive into these dashboards and KPIs. Again, we'll post this in the community. So if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to list them there.